1, 2. Simkin. Who hates Simkin? She hates Simkin. He hates Simkin. I hate Simkin. You hate Simkin. She hates Simkin. We hate Simkin. Who hates Simkin? I hate Simkin. They hate Simkin.
Show y'all. This is the platinum plaque for Beautiful Midnight. Now, again, this is before 604 even existed. This was November 1999. They gave this to me because I was the lawyer. And this one's a little unusual because they include the SoundScan. So SoundScan doesn't exist anymore, but what SoundScan was the method of calculating sales of albums. So if you went to the store and you bought a CD and you scanned it, it automatically went into the SoundScan software as well. And I think the reason they put this on here was that it broke some records. Like I remember when this record came out, Matthew Good was the first artist I worked with that had real success. It's a funny story. I'm not sure if I want to tell it because it's a long story, but it's a funny story how I ended up with him. It was really when I was transitioning from criminal law and immigration law. I was a poverty lawyer. And I transitioned from that into entertainment. And he was the first artist I really repped in that way. I had repped a small label locally called LSD Records, which was owned by the brothers, the Levins brothers, who owned a couple of recording studios in town. And they started a record label. One of the bands they signed is called Lowest of the Low. Great band, by the way. It's another little plug. Nothing to do with 604, so I'm not plugging 604, but just Lowest of the Low are a great band. That was, I think, the first record contract I ever prepared, like in this case on behalf of the label. And things unfortunately kind of went sideways on that project. Doesn't matter the details, but there was some disagreement between the label and the artist, and it got a bit ugly. And they had a very big lawyer, like they had probably the best known, toughest sort of entertainment lawyer. And I was just a kid. I really didn't know what I was doing. I was just sort of dabbling in the entertainment stuff. And things kind of turned ugly, and they threatened to sue LSD. And I stood up to this lawyer. Well, I could say his name, I guess, Graham Henderson. And it settled well for my clients. And I guess the word kind of spread about that. And the guy who was managing the Lowest of the Low at the time was also Matthew Good's manager. And I guess he was impressed with what I had done on the Lowest of the Low thing and kind of said, geez, I don't ever want to be against you. So I'll tell you what, I want you to check out, my client, Matthew Good. And I said, sure. So Matthew had a show, boy, it's so long ago. This is like more than 30 years ago. Matt had a show, I want to say it was on Robson Street at almost like a cafe. It wasn't like a club show. And he was not a rock band at that point. In fact, quite the opposite. He was more of a folk artist. I don't know if I'm making this up in my memory or if this is true, but I have a recollection that he even had one of those harmonica holders like Bob Dylan has, and so it was a very different act than it became, but the songs were so good. And I remember going up to him and saying, I'm Jonathan Simkin. Your manager asked me to come check you out. I think you're amazing. And I was, as I always am, really honest in a kind of blunt way to kind of go, look, I'm brand new at this. I'm going to tell you the truth. I don't even know what I'm doing completely, but I think you're amazing. And I think I can get you a record deal. If you give me a chance, I'll make you a deal. Give me 6 months to get your record deal. If I get you a deal, we work out a fair fee. If I don't get you a deal, you don't pay me. And he said, you put it in writing? And I said, yes, I'll put it in writing. And I did. And I got him a deal. Now, I'm going to be careful here. I got him a deal. I was very involved in it, but there were other people involved too. I'm not going to be a credit monger like there are so many in the music business, because I worked closely with his then manager, Frank Weipert. Shout out to Frank. I'll be damned. We got him a record deal. We got him a record deal with A&M Records. And then things happened quickly. Like Matt's success, this was his third album, because the first album we did was an album called Last of the Ghetto Astronauts, which was independent. and financed by his publisher, Michael McCarty, who's also been on this podcast. Shout out to Michael big time, because Michael had belief in Matt and basically said, hey, if we can't get your record deal, tell you what, I'll pay for the record. And that's what he did. And that record did well, especially in the West Coast. Like, there were a couple of songs from Last of the Ghetto Astronauts that became staples in Vancouver radio. Alabama Motel Room. But it's funny, I have this really funny memory. There's a sort of infamous nightclub in Vancouver called the Roxy, which is kind of a pickup joint, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it. And but they have shows there too. And I remember Matt playing a show. I think it was a CFOX show. CFOX, a famous local rock station, and they used to put on shows. And I remember Chad there, Chad Kruger, and he was right at, Chad was always a big supporter of other bands in the city, and he was right in the front row. I remember him yelling, Alabama Motel Room, because just he wanted Matt to play that song so badly. But so that was the first album. Then he got signed. He got signed to A&M, and the second album was Underdogs. And that was the first major label record that he did. And it did well, and it did well quickly. And it was a hit right away. Great video, by the way. I'll do a bit of a shout out to Bill Morrison for that. And then, every single did well in that album. And in fact, Matt fired Frank, his manager, kind of halfway through that album cycle. There was a brief period of time that I managed Matt then with Christy Thompson, who also worked with him. We weren't managers really. Funny enough, we're both managers now. I just saw her last weekend. We weren't managers then. I was just a lawyer, but basically Matt said, look, can you help me out until I have a manager? We're like, sure, of course. I managed him throughout Apparitions. Apparitions was a single on Underdogs, very big single for him. Kind of changed the game for him, kind of changed the playing field for him. There's so many funny stories about Apparitions. Like, we made a video, and again, that's still up on YouTube, great video. And we didn't really ask for input from A&M, and they didn't really give any. I think at that point we had some success, so they were willing to let us do our thing. And we did our thing and made this video. I remember getting a call from, what was his name? John Reed. He was the head, I think, of A&M at that point. He said, Jonathan, there's no performance in this video. The band doesn't perform. And I said, yes, and? Well, we can't have that. There's got to be performance. I said, why? He said, well, because music videos have performance. That's what the fans want to see. So I remember being like, because I loved the video just the way it was. I remember I brought it to Matt, said, hey man, the label doesn't love the video. They think there should be performance. And Matt felt so strongly, this is the art I'm making. And unless they can force me to do otherwise, this is the video. And I conveyed that to it became Universal, but at that time it was still A&M. I conveyed that to the powers that be at A&M. And that was a bit of a weird one. They weren't very happy about it. And I remember saying to them, listen, he knows his audience. He knows what his audience wants. We're not his audience. We're old men. I wasn't old then, but they were. And I was certainly not. I was certainly older than Matt. And I said, I think you're wrong, and we're not changing the video. That video was a smash. Number one on Much Music, changed everything. And then he got management, real management, and the rest was history. And then that sort of set up this album, Beautiful Midnight. And Beautiful Midnight was kind of the big Matthew Good moment. It was the album that did the best, I think, and it's not this plaque, but boy, I could be wrong. I think it went 4 times platinum. It was a massive, massive album. It got him a deal in the States. He was everywhere on the radio. Hello Time Bomb, huge single. Strange Days, huge single. I still hear Load Me Up. And see, and I was talking earlier about songwriters and how much I love working with songwriters. There's a great example. I was so fascinated by that song. And it turns out that song is about insomnia, which I thought, it's fascinating when you sort of hear a song on the radio. And I mean, that's the thing about art. Art doesn't have an inherent meaning. It means whatever the listener wants it to mean when they listen to it. Good art, at least. And I remember just being fascinated that that's what that song was about. But Hello Time Bomb, huge single. Strange Days, huge single. Load Me Up, huge single. There was another single, The Future is X-Rated, huge single. And it's also got other songs on here that are just some of my favorite Matthew Good Band songs, like Suburbia, which I still listen to. One of my favorite Matthew Good Band songs. But it was also a funny song. It was a bit of an outlier as well because Matt used to perform it without a guitar because Matt's a guitar player. But it's the one song, at least back then in the set, that he would perform without a guitar. And he's one of those guys who probably should have a guitar because he was so not used to it. It would always be weirdly awkward, him without a guitar. He'd always kind of lurch around. He seemed uncomfortable, but it was so compelling. At this point, all these years later, because that's 99, it's what year, 25? So we're talking almost 30 years ago. To me, the song, there's two songs on this album that personally I go back to. Load Me Up and Suburbia. And Suburbia is never even a single. I just think it's a beautiful, beautiful song. I think I can talk about this because Matt has talked about this publicly. Matt has bipolar disease. The mood swings were intense with him. And again, I wouldn't be talking about this if he hadn't talked about this himself publicly. And I remember being concerned about it at the time. And we didn't know he was bipolar at the time. In fact, I don't think I even knew what bipolar was at the time. But I knew something was not right. And listen, Matt always treated me well. But still, I knew something was not right. And I remember saying something, God, it's one of those stories that it's funny. After all these years in the business, there's not too much that I look back on and have regrets about. For the most part, I feel like I've always done the right thing, or at least tried to. But I remember going to the record company and telling them, I think there's something wrong with him. Like, I think maybe he needs some help. And I didn't mean it I was concerned. I wanted somebody on the team to kind of step up and help. And I'll never forget, I don't want to say who it was, but it was one of the people at the label saying to me, we're not doing he's writing hits. We're not messing with anything. Almost as though the fact that he was writing hits mattered more than the fact that he might be suffering from a serious mental illness. Although I'm going to say this too, I don't think I ever saw them have a bad night. I mean, I went to a lot of shows. That was hands down the best band in Canada for that moment in time. They had a moment sort of right when Beautiful, sort of between Underdogs and then the release of this record, where I don't know if there's a better live band in Canada. They were incredible. There was a certain brand of Canadian rock at that time. I used to call it Canadian angst rock, because there's all these sort of great bands who had sort of a dose of angst in the music. Matthew, Moist, Headpins, Tragically Hip. I mean, there were a lot of rock bands in Canada who did great in Canada. Our Lady Peace. Lots and lots of bands, The Watchmen, who really did well in Canada, but never seemed to be able to crack in the States. And I don't know if they were just too Canadian. Like, I could never understand why it didn't translate. Matt got a deal with Atlantic Records. Just didn't work. I think part of the problem too was that, by the time that the Matthew Good Band got a deal in the States, they were a big band here. So they had grown accustomed to a certain style of, like you tour in a bus as opposed to a van. And I think it was hard for them to get back into a van after being in a bus. I'm saying that both kind of literally and figuratively. In a funny kind of way, Nickelback was the first Canadian band to really do well outside of Canada. I mean, the Tragically Hip had a million chances. They were on Saturday Night Live. So it wasn't for lack of opportunity, but I don't know if it was the angstiness of it. Because angst is a very specific thing. It's different than just like depressing hard rock. Like there was sort of a self-reflective sort of angst to the whole thing. And I really think that it just didn't translate to the American experience.
He hates Simkin. I hate Simkin.